Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke going further than any other candidate last night when it comes to gun violence, saying if he is elected president, he would issue a mandatory buyback of the type of guns used by the military on battlefields. As you can imagine, the reaction from some conservative corners was swift. And Beto O'Rourke joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so that was a moment that got a lot of attention last night. It's getting a lot of attention this morning. And I'm just wondering this morning if you have any concern that by saying that so openly, so unapologetically, that you have somehow given President Trump a campaign ad to say, see, Democrats want to confiscate your guns.
No, Allison, I'm far more worried about the 40,000 Americans who are killed every year through gun violence. Worried about the victims of those mass shootings, the parents who've lost a child, the mother I met who lost a 15-year-old daughter who bled to death in front of her very eyes. I'm worried about that. And I'm worried that we won't take action because we've been compromised by the politics and the polling and the worries about what the candidate's going to do if we say the right thing, the true thing, the necessary thing. So I'm going to say the necessary thing, which is background checks are important. Red flag laws, essential. We should stop selling weapons of war. But if we leave 10 million of them out there, they will become the instruments of terror that we've seen in El Paso, in Midland, Odessa, in Sutherland Springs. And those are just 3 mass shootings in our state, but all across this country. So we've got to do the right thing. And I'm confident that the popular will is there, not just among Democrats, but Republicans and gun owners, as well as independents, Democrats, and non-gun owners alike. So we just got to move now. We got to move.
Well, let's look at where the polling is, because it's interesting. I think particularly on this issue, it's exactly divided. The latest Marist NPR poll shows that in terms of should Congress create a mandatory buyback program of assault guns, just what you said last night, 45% of the country says yes. 46% of respondents say no. And so I hear you. You're not invested in the polling, what you're saying. You're not worried about what the right will say. However, if you don't win the general election, you don't even get to make that policy. So is it a concern that it's not a winning position for the general?
It's not a concern of mine. And that's in part informed by listening to people in conservative parts of America, in the southwestern part of Virginia, where not only does no Democratic presidential contender go to, but I don't think they've had a candidate for the presidency visit Bland County before. But the folks in Bland County, as conservative as it might be, as proud a gun owner as they might be, they're talking about this issue. And folks are saying, look, I would give up that AR-15 or that AK-47. I do not need it to hunt, don't need it to defend myself in my home. They recognize that this is a weapon designed for war, to kill people as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a number as possible. And it has no place in our communities. Listening to the ER doctors who are treating these wounds, ER doctors who've also served in the military and say, this is what I saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. Never thought I'd see it in El Paso or Midland or Odessa. If we accept this, we're complicit in it, and I refuse to accept it. And I believe at the end of the day, Allison, a majority of Americans refuse to accept this.
Here's one that doesn't. The state rep from Texas, Briscoe Cain, tweeted at you right after the debate. He said, my AR is ready for you, Robert Francis. They're using your first and middle names. How did you hear that tweet?
You know, I think Twitter took it down because you have somebody with a weapon of war threatening to use it against somebody who's talking about gun violence in this country. That's exactly why Briscoe Cain should not have an AR-15. I remember another moment not too unlike this one. We were finishing a March for Our Lives organized by these wonderful high school students in El Paso. I had my 8-year-old Henry riding on my shoulders, and as we come into San Jacinto Plaza, there are 2 guys, both with AR-15s, waiting for us at the end of the march. And Henry says, Dad, what's up with this? I thought we were marching against this. And I said, you know, don't pay him any mind, don't give him any attention. But they were there to intimidate and to make a point and really to threaten political violence, which is exactly what this state rep is doing right now. The moment that we accept that is the moment that we lose this country, that we can nonviolently and peacefully resolve our differences, come to different conclusions on different issues, but at the end of the day, move forward as Americans. That's been the genius of this country for as long as we've been a country. We cannot lose that now. So for Twitter taking that down, I think that makes sense. For folks who called that out, that makes sense as well. We cannot accept that.
Well, you obviously called it out. You said this is a death threat, Representative. That's what you tweeted back. Are you going to contact the FBI?
I believe that someone on the campaign did contacted the FBI and contacted Twitter. I mean, anytime you have somebody threatening to use violence against somebody in this country to resolve a political issue, or really for any reason, that's a matter for law enforcement. But it really drives home the point, better than I could have made. Representative Briscoe Cain is making the case that no one should have an AR-15, that they can hold over someone else in this country, saying, look, if we disagree on something, let me introduce you to my AR-15. Absolutely wrong.
Congressman, one more moment that's getting a lot of attention this morning is what happened when Julian Castro went after Joe Biden, it seemed 3 times, for what sounded like a not at all veiled barb about his age and memory. Was that fair game to you?
You know, I wasn't really excited about that. And in fact, in my opening in the debate last night, I talked about how this threat that we have of Donald Trump, the racism and violence that he has welcomed out into the open, that he directed essentially to my hometown of El Paso, Texas, which killed 22 of the members of our community, that the pettiness, the name calling, the small ball politics, and that was an example of that last night. That's not going to be up to this threat. That will not defeat Donald Trump. That won't bring this deeply divided country back together again. So look, if you've got a policy difference with Joe Biden, by all means, let's air it at the debate. But that kind of personal attack, I don't think is what we need right now and is insufficient to the challenges that we face.
Congressman Beto O'Rourke, thanks so much for being up extra early to be on New Day. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Secretary Esper. Today, our nation honors and mourns the nearly 3,000 lives that were stolen from us on September 11th, 2001. On these grounds, 184 people were murdered when al-Qaeda terrorists overtook American Airlines Flight 77 and crashed it into the Pentagon. For every American who lived through that day, the September 11th attack is seared into our soul. It was a day filled with shock, horror, sorrow, and righteous fury. I vividly remember when I first heard the news. I was sitting at home watching a major business television show. Early that morning, Jack Welch, the legendary head of General Electric, was about to be interviewed when all of a sudden they cut away. At first, there were different reports. It was a boiler fire, but I knew that boilers aren't at the top of a building. It was a kitchen explosion in Windows on the World. Nobody really knew what happened. There was great confusion. I was looking out of a window from a building in Midtown Manhattan, directly at the World Trade Center, when I saw a second plane at a tremendous speed go into the second tower. It was then that I realized the world was going to change. I was no longer going to be, and it could never, ever be, that innocent place that I thought it was. Soon after, I went down to Ground Zero with men who worked for me to try to help in any little way that we could. We were not alone. So many others were scattered around, trying to do the same. They were all trying to help. But for the families who join us, this is your anniversary of personal and permanent loss. It's the day that has replayed in your memory 1,000 times over. The last kiss, the last phone call, the last time hearing those precious words, "I love you." Then the attack, the anguish of knowing your family member had boarded one of these flights or was working in the World Trade Center or serving right here at the Pentagon. You waited, you prayed, you answered that most dreaded call, and your life changed forever. To each of you, the First Lady and I are united with you in grief. We come here in the knowledge that we cannot erase the pain or reverse the evil of that dark and wretched day. But we offer you all that we have, our unwavering loyalty, our undying devotion, and our eternal pledge that your loved ones will never, ever be forgotten. 18 years ago, the terrorists struck this citadel of power and American strength. But the enemy soon learned that they could not weaken the spirit of our people. In times of distress, the heart of the American patriot only grows stronger and more determined. Even in the midst of the attack, the world witnessed the awesome power of American defiance. 40 passengers and crew on Flight 93 rose up, fought back, and thwarted the enemy's wicked plans. In their final moments, these American heroes thunderously declared that we alone decide our fate. We saw American perseverance in the valiant New York firefighters, police officers, first responders, military, and everyday citizens who raced into the crashing towers to rescue innocent people. One such American was retired Army Colonel Rick Rescorla, who gave his life on 9/11. Rick earned the Silver Star and the Purple Heart for his service in Vietnam. He later became the Vice President for Security at Morgan Stanley in the World Trade Center. On the day of the attack, Rick died while leading countless others to safety. His selfless actions saved approximately 2,700 lives. Today, I'm honored to announce that we will soon be awarding the late Rick Rescorla the Presidential Citizens Medal for his extraordinary sacrifice. Though Rick has left this earth, we will ensure that the memory of his deeds will never, ever be forgotten. His memory will forever endure. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. Here on the western side of the Pentagon, we saw brave men and women rush into the fire and race into the scorching flames to rescue their colleagues. When evil seeks to do us harm, the incredible men and women of the United States military answer with unyielding valor and unstoppable resolve. Navy Admiral David Thomas crawled through live wires and helped lift a wall of debris to save the life of a colleague. As Admiral Thomas remembers, it was the worst day of my life, but the heroism and selfless disregard I saw that horrible morning is forever burned in my heart. Admiral Thomas, America salutes you and every patriot who defied evil that day. Thank you very much, Admiral. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Army Ranger Chris Brayman repeatedly went back inside the burning building, rescuing one injured person after another. Before he entered, he said a prayer and asked God to give him strength, and then he dove into the suffocating smoke and fumes and flames. At the same time, Sheila Moody had just prayed that someone would find her. Then she heard Chris's voice. As Sheila says, God sent Chris as her guardian angel. To Sheila and Chris, America is strengthened by your goodness and your grace and your bravery. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. To fulfill our unbreakable promise to every survivor and family of 9/11, earlier this year, we fully reauthorized the Victims' Compensation Fund to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. Since September 11th, nearly 6 million young men and women have joined the United States Armed Forces. They have crossed seas, climbed mountains, trekked through deserts, and rushed into enemy compounds to face down the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. Nearly 7,000 service members have laid down their lives to protect our home, our flag, and our American way of life. American freedom survives only because there are patriots willing to sacrifice everything in its defense. No tribute is sufficient to convey the infinite depth of our nation's gratitude. On this solemn day of remembrance, our thoughts also turn to the 200,000 valiant soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Marines who are now, at this very moment, stationed overseas. We do not seek conflict, but if anyone dares to strike our land, we will respond with the full measure of American power and the iron will of the American spirit, and that spirit is unbreakable. We had peace talks scheduled a few days ago. I called them off when I learned that they had killed a great American soldier from Puerto Rico and 11 other innocent people. They thought they would use this attack to show strength, but actually what they showed is unrelenting weakness. The last 4 days, we have hit our enemy harder than they have ever been hit before, and that will continue. And if for any reason they come back to our country, we will go wherever they are and use power the likes of which the United States has never used before. And I'm not even talking about nuclear power. They will never have seen anything like what will happen to them. No enemy on earth can match the overwhelming strength, skill, and might of the American armed forces. And we have rebuilt and strengthened in the last 2.5 years, spending $700 billion, $716 billion, and now just approved $738 billion, more money by far than ever spent on our armed forces. You are the fearless sentinels who stand watch over all that we cherish and everything we hold sacred, priceless, and dear. This morning, we also give thanks to the dedicated men and women at the Department of Homeland Security. Their department was created after 9/11 to help secure our immigration system and ensure that those who threaten our people are denied entry to our shores. We're indebted to every law enforcement official, state, local, and federal, who devotes their life to keeping America safe. As we gather at this moment and at this incredible memorial, we are reminded that there is no greater testament to our fallen heroes than the presence of their families who knew and loved them so much. Among the family members here today is Stephanie Dunn. Her husband, Navy Commander Patrick Dunn, was one of the patriots who gave his life right here 18 years ago. Before he left that morning, Patrick gave Stephanie a big, beautiful kiss. Then, for the first time, he leaned down and kissed her pregnant stomach. Stephanie was just 2 months along with their first child. Earlier this year, their daughter, Allie, celebrated her 17th birthday. Allie grew up into a strong, truly remarkable young woman. She mentors the children of our nation's wounded warriors And recently, I was honored to give Ali the President's Volunteer Service Award for her hundreds of hours of community service. We are blessed to have Ali here with us at today's ceremony. Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. And Ali, I know your dad is watching over you. He's right up there. He's watching from heaven, looking down right now with love and pride. He is so proud of you. Thank you very much. Incredible. Also joining us is the Viggiano family. For generations, the Viggiano family has served in our military and in the New York City fire and police departments. These are two great departments. I grew up with them, I know. On September 11th, NYPD detective Joseph Viggiano rushed into the World Trade Center and died rescuing his fellow citizens. His brother John was a New York firefighter. He also gave his life that day at Ground Zero. At the time, Joseph's three sons were just young boys, ages 8, 6, and 3 months old. This morning they are with us. The youngest, John, just started his freshman year of college at SUNY Maritime College, and he plans to join the military. Joseph Jr. is a Marine reservist, and just like his father, he is a proud member of the NYPD. And James is a corporal in the Marines. On his last deployment, James was stationed on the USS New York, a ship made using 24 tons of steel from the World Trade Center. Every time he left the mess hall on his way to his bunk, he passed a picture of his dad. To John, Joseph, and James, and to the Viggiano family, you have sacrificed beyond measure, and you will never, ever stop giving back to this country. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Very proud of you. Thank you. Thank you very much. The heroes present today remind us of an immortal truth. The future of our nation is secured through the vigilance of our people. The brave men and women who tore through the gates of hell to save the hurt and the wounded. The service members who honor the friends who perished by continuing their exceptional life of service. The moms and dads who endure the loss of their soulmates and fill their children's lives with all of the adoration in the world. The sons and daughters who suffered grave loss and yet through it all persevere to care for our neighbors, defend our homeland, and safeguard our nation. Each of your lives tells the story of courage and character, virtue and valor, resilience and resolve, loyalty and love. This morning, we make a sacred vow to carry on this noble legacy. Today and every day, we pledge to honor our history, to treasure our liberty, to uplift our communities, to live up to our values, to prove worthy of our heroes, and above all, stronger than ever, to never, ever forget. We are now and will forever be one American family, united by patriotism, bound by destiny, and sustained by the faith of Almighty God. Thank you. God bless you. God bless our military. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Some breaking news this afternoon. The White House has confirmed that Hamza bin Laden, that's the son of Osama bin Laden, has been killed in a U.S. counterterrorism operation. A White House statement said that the loss of Hamza bin Laden not only deprives al-Qaeda of important leadership skills and the symbolic connection to his father, but undermines important operational activities of the group. Well, our Foreign Affairs editor, Deborah Haynes, is on the line for us. Deborah, insofar as the war on terror goes, this news is a pretty huge development.
Well, it's a development, but I wouldn't say it's a huge development because we have known for the last 2 months that Hamza bin Laden was suspected to have been killed. NBC actually broke that line back in July, and while there was no official confirmation or official public statement from the White House, sources off the record were indicating that that was what was believed. Also, the timing of the death, that hasn't yet been confirmed. It's understood that it happened in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, so that would be kind of 2017, 2018. So this isn't a recent development. But very interestingly and importantly, Al-Qaeda itself has yet to actually comment on this, confirm or deny that Hamza bin Laden is dead. The fact that you've got Donald Trump, the White House, saying that he is dead and he was killed in a U.S. counterterrorism operation in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, that indicates that they must have solid evidence to believe that it's true. But the silence on the part of Al-Qaeda is notable. In terms of the actual impact of what this means, his death, operationally, actually, it means very little. Hamza bin Laden was being groomed to be a leader of the Al-Qaeda group, taking on that role that began with his father, Osama bin Laden. But that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And while the statement from the White House says that he was playing a part in planning and dealing with various terrorist groups, there's no real sense that his death is actually going to impact on operations. And it's important to remember that while Al-Qaeda has perhaps slipped from the public mind in the sense that Islamic State is the group, the terrorist group, the Islamist extremist group that most people think about when they think of terrorist atrocities and attacks, because that has been predominant over the past few years. Al-Qaeda is very much still there, still alive, still planning, still seeking to conduct what's known as spectacular attacks against the West. So while, yes, it's important for the White House to have hunted down and killed what they believe to be the threat that was posed by Hamza bin Laden, the overall mission of hunting down members of that group continues.
Yeah, as you were intimating there, I mean, the influence of Al-Qaeda was considered to have been hugely weakened, wasn't it, back in 2011 when Osama bin Laden was killed. But there's a lot of talk in the last few months about the extent to which they have rebuilt and regrouped.
Yes, and in fact, I interviewed Ben Wallace, who was at that time a security minister over in the summer, now, of course, the defense secretary. And we were talking more broadly about Islamist terrorism and the shape it takes at the moment. And he made the point of saying that Al-Qaeda is very much still looking to launch attacks, including here in Europe. So clearly on the minds of government ministers, of the security services. And yes, while back in 2011, you had that the SEAL Team 6, the US Navy SEALs, conducting that audacious raid into Pakistan, where they had found Osama bin Laden's hiding place in a place called Abbottabad, and conducting that raid in which the Al-Qaeda leader was killed. And that was obviously hugely important for the US, given the September 11 attacks back in 2001. That moment then, there was a huge blow to the group in terms of the loss of such a charismatic leader that had inspired so many. And his successor is a man called Ayman Zawahiri. He has much less of the same kind of draw power that Osama bin Laden had, and you've seen over the past few years with the spread and the growth of Islamic State in Syria, they were able to attract a lot more recruits during that time because of their ability to send out messages, to deliver messages across the internet using social media, using those slick videos to try to spread their propaganda, which unfortunately was successful. And that's something that Al-Qaeda hadn't done in the past as effectively, but obviously it's a learning organisation, and it's really important to remember that it hasn't gone away.
The Prime Minister says he's cautiously optimistic of getting a Brexit deal. Boris Johnson will travel to Luxembourg on Monday for his first meeting since taking office with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and the EU's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier. At an event in Rotherham today, he told an audience there is the rough shape of an agreement beginning to form. Here's our deputy political editor, John Pienaar.
The name's Boris Johnson. Trust me. It looks like campaigning, and it is, for future votes and for trust that he's the one to deliver Brexit. No more delays. An exciting time, he told one supporter. Not exciting, worrying, she said.
I think it's absurd.
Maybe worrying for him too, wanting a Brexit deal, attacked by critics for closing the Commons.
I'm all in favour of our MPs.
Why are you not with them in Parliament? Sorting out the mess that you have created. Get back to Parliament and sort it out.
He's being heckled by the Commons Speaker too, who's warned of more laws to ban a no-deal Brexit, maybe force another extension.
Whatever the shenanigans that may be going on at Westminster, we will get on with delivering our agenda and preparing to take this country out of the EU on October the 31st.
What chance of a deal? He's hoping for a last-minute breakthrough.
I'm cautiously optimistic. How is that a good enough characterisation, Paul, of where we are? I'm cautiously optimistic.
He'll meet the EU Commission President in Luxembourg on Monday, still a long way from agreement. His Democratic Unionist allies want to be convinced by a Brexit deal they see as no threat to the Union, and they haven't been.
We're not going to vote for any arrangement which makes us different than the rest of the United Kingdom and as a result forms a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
As far as the Irish government is concerned, our position hasn't changed, but I have to say what's been put forward so far falls very far short of what we would need.
So the chances of a deal still seem remote, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. It would certainly help Boris Johnson out of a tight political corner. If he's forced to extend Brexit, he could expose the Tories to a potentially serious threat from the Brexit Party. And now there's a law that could virtually outlaw a no-deal Brexit. Wanting a deal, even needing one, won't necessarily make it happen.
Good luck with Brexit, sir.
Where there's a political will, there's often a political way, but no one has found it yet. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
The Metropolitan Police has ended its criminal investigation into the campaign group Leave.eu over its spending during the 2016 Brexit referendum. The inquiry began after the Electoral Commission referred the campaign, founded by the businessman Aaron Banks, to the police and fined it £70,000. But the Met now says there's insufficient evidence to justify further action. Mr Banks has called for an inquiry into the Electoral Commission's actions, and a separate investigation by the National Crime Agency into other allegations is ongoing. Well, it seems a general election isn't too far away, with Downing Street insisting it's the only way to break the Brexit deadlock in Parliament. The earliest it could take place is towards the end of November. Our chief political correspondent Vicky Young takes a look at some of the key constituencies that could determine the result.
We're in a period of pretty unpredictable politics, and the current makeup of the House of Commons suggests a general election may not be that far away. Let's take a look at the state of the parties right now. The Conservatives have 288 MPs and Labour 247. There are 35 independents, more than half of them former Conservative MPs, booted out of the parliamentary party for voting against the government. The SNP has 35 and the Liberal Democrats 17. With all the others, that's a total of 650, and no party is anywhere near the required 326 for an overall majority. So what's likely to be the Tories' election strategy? Well, in 2017, the two main parties dominated, the Tories taking 43% and Labour 41% of the vote. Compare that to how the parties are polling now. The Conservatives have had a poll bounce under Boris Johnson, but are still averaging around 33%. Labour are down to about 26% in September's polls. So let's take a look at the electoral map from 2017. If the current polls were reflected in a general election, the Conservatives would take 24 seats off Labour, places like Kensington, Dudley North and Newcastle under Lyme. But at the same time, they risk losing seats. Places like Stirling and Gordon in Scotland would likely go to the SNP. Cheltenham, Southport and Winchester to the Liberal Democrats. So the Conservatives need to take more seats from Labour, and they'll have their eyes on the ones that voted for Brexit. Looking at the Conservatives' top 50 Labour-held targets, it's estimated that 39 voted Leave. Places like Stoke-on-Trent North with a 72% Leave vote, Blackpool South 68% or Great Grimsby 71% Leave. But will historical anti-Tory feeling here undermine this strategy? That'll be one of the key features of an election. And the other unknown is the potential impact of Nigel Farage's Brexit party. Could it damage the Tories' chances by winning the support of Leave voters?
Vicky Young there. Let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's at Westminster. John, David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, who of course held the Brexit referendum in 2016, is now breaking his silence on the current Brexit impasse.
And how, Clive, we've seen past Prime Ministers take pot shots at their successors, but never anything quite like this. David Cameron's about to release his memoirs, and he's given a brutally plain-spoken interview to The Times. In the book, he describes his now former friend, Michael Gove, the Cabinet Minister for No Deal Planning, as mendacious, a liar, in other words. He describes him and Boris Johnson as having left the truth at home during the EU referendum campaign, having behaved appallingly, and he's scathing about the decision to expel rebels from the parliamentary party and stop them standing as candidates. And as for suspending Parliament, he calls that sharp practice, a sort of old-fashioned term for trickery, for cheap trickery. Now, this is a row of a kind we haven't quite seen before. It compounds the row that's going on just at the moment. And we're now looking at a former Prime Minister attacking the present Prime Minister on top of another former Prime Minister, John Major, challenging Boris Johnson in court. Has there ever been a Prime Minister as polarising and divisive as the one we're seeing now in modern times? It's true that those closest to Boris Johnson in number 10 Downing Street believe these divisions may work for him and help convince Brexiteer voters that Mr Johnson is on their side. But if the Prime Minister hoped to deliver what some have called a clean break Brexit and to reunify the country afterwards, well, surely now achieving either one of those ambitions, let alone both of them, looks like an uphill slog.
OK, John, thank you. John Pienaar there at Westminster.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good day, everyone. I'm Paula Ferris. We are coming on the air right now with some breaking news. Just moments ago, President Trump tweeting that he has asked his national security advisor, John Bolton, to resign. Now, this news follows the failed plan for peace talks with the Taliban at Camp David to end the long-going war in Afghanistan. It is America's longest war. Bolton was the leading voice against this particular deal, putting him right at odds with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The president also tweeting, quote, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration." Now, a White House briefing was scheduled for later today involving Bolton, Secretary Pompeo, and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. This was the Trump administration's third national security advisor, and the president thanking Bolton for his service, saying that he will be naming a new national security advisor next week. We want to get right to ABC's senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, who is in D.C. for us right now. Terry, did this come out of nowhere?
Well, no, this has long been a tension, as you noted, between President Trump, who came to power telling his voters, telling the United States that he wanted to end these long, long wars, and John Bolton, for his generation, the hero of the hawks and conservatives and neoconservatives who advocated a very aggressive projection of American military power around the world. They were at odds from the beginning, but the timing is a surprise, certainly. And John Bolton already responding on Twitter to the president's statement there. President Trump saying he asked for John Bolton's resignation. Bolton has just tweeted, "I offered to resign last night." And President Trump said, quote, "Let's talk about it tomorrow." So the usual drama in the Trump administration. But this is a major shakeup, no question about it. We are told that from people close to Ambassador Bolton, he was the UN ambassador, that he is proud that no bad deals, quote unquote, no bad deals were made while he was National Security Advisor. A sign there that he opposed President Trump's effort to make a deal with the Taliban, one that President Trump wanted to do and culminate at Camp David until he canceled that earlier this week. So this is no doubt a major shakeup in the Trump White House and one that now opens the door for a different direction in that revolving door at the National Security Council.
Yeah, definitely a rocky relationship, Terry. And again, the third National Security Advisor, he's preceded by H.R. McMaster as well as Mike Flynn. I want to bring in ABC's Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz. And Martha, Terry just touched on it. The timing of this is very precarious because President Trump has sent a diplomatic opening with both Iran and North Korea, and now he fires his National Security Advisor.
Exactly, and President Trump knew all along where John Bolton stood on a lot of these international issues. He is a hardliner. John Bolton was at odds with him over Iran, over China, over North Korea. And North Korea, we just had once again last night a test fire of short-range missiles. That's been at least 8 rounds of test-fired missiles since July, when President Trump, in what amounted to little more than a photo op, met Kim Jong-un on the demilitarized zone that divides North and South Korea. But I think the big question now is who comes next. Does President Trump want someone who strictly agrees with him, or will he get some sort of differing opinion? And given what just happened to John Bolton, it may be someone who is more closely aligned to how President Trump views these foreign policy issues.
And Martha, any ideas on who that could be? Again, this is his third National Security Advisor. We've seen Mike Flynn, H.R. McMaster come and go through that office. Any ideas?
No ideas at this point. But again, I think President Trump is clearly looking for someone who thinks in the same way he does. John Bolton was very much hardline, don't just trust, verify, was constantly pushing the president on these issues and butting heads. So my prediction is it will be someone a little more in line with the president's thinking.
Someone aligned with the president. Martha, thank you. Kira Phillips also in D.C. for us. And Kira, you're at the White House. What are sources telling you about how this all went down?
Well, I think Martha really hit it when she said that hardlined, that Bolton and the president butted heads. You know, over the past year, I've been talking with White House sources that have told me that their relationship was very contentious. I followed up with those same White House officials, those sources, and Paula, them telling me that Bolton actually has felt undermined by the president, and also that the president has embarrassed him from time to time. So when you hear Bolton described as a hawk, this is somebody that if he feels embarrassed, if he feels undermined, he's not going to want to stay in this position necessarily. Paula.
All right, Kira, Terry, and Martha, thank you for your reporting. Again, just to recap, President Trump has announced that his National Security Advisor, John Bolton, is out after just over a year and a half on the job. This is his third National Security Advisor. We're going to return now to regular programming. We will continue coverage on ABC News Live, our 24/7 streaming channel, available on abcnews.com and on all of your devices. Also, we'll have a complete wrap-up on World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm Paula Ferris in New York. Have a great day, everyone.
All right, guys, and we continue coverage. Breaking news, you just heard Paula say there that President Trump has fired the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. He has officially resigned. He's the third to hold this position. And in a tweet just earlier, the president wrote, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration. And therefore, I asked John for his resignation," which was given to me this morning. I thank John very much for his service. I will be naming a new national security advisor next week. And John Bolton also responded to that tweet, him saying, I offered to resign last night, and President Trump said, let's talk about it tomorrow. So I want to bring in ABC's senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry, good to see you. If you can just break down, obviously the timing of this is a bit of a surprise.
Well, this was a long time coming, but there's no doubt that it comes as a surprise. It apparently came as a surprise to John Bolton. President Trump saying he asked for Bolton's resignation. Bolton saying that he offered it last night, and Trump said we'll talk about it in the morning. It looks like he learned that he was out of the White House through the tweet. And that is typical of the drama of this administration. But more substantively, this is a major shakeup for the Trump team and the Trump national security vision. John Bolton came into that office, that very important national security advisor office, as one of the leading hawks in the country, a hero to conservatives and neoconservatives. He often argued for an aggressive projection of American military power around the world. He was one of the prime backers of the Iraq War, long before 9/11 even. And recently, he's been very hawkish on Iran. Confronting Iran over its ambitions and nuclear ambitions in the Middle East. But he never got along with President Trump, who came into office, ran on ending these endless wars. And in fact, it has been said that one of the instructions he gave to his original national security team at the start of his administration, no more wars. So these two men were at odds from the beginning, and it looks like it didn't end well.
Yeah, so Terry, can you just talk a little bit about this meeting that was supposed to happen? Bolton was actually against the idea of meeting with the Taliban and withdrawing U.S. forces, and that put him at odds with Pompeo.
Exactly. I think that is the trigger here, Kimberly. So the president has made no secret that he wants to do a deal with the Taliban to get the U.S. out of Afghanistan. Now, American national security experts and people in the Pentagon as well don't want to withdraw hastily. But the president saw the opportunity to close that deal in a theatrical and spectacular way with peace talks at Camp David. And that was very difficult for John Bolton to swallow. Camp David, the place where, as Congresswoman Liz Cheney, that was where the United States originally planned its response to 9/11, and no Taliban official should ever go there, she said. That said, John Bolton didn't like the deal that was coming down. The president determined to end the war in Afghanistan as far as America is concerned. That those two are at loggerheads, and it looks like the breaking point came when the president disclosed he wanted that secret peace talks deal done at Camp David itself. And it looks like that is one of the final straws that broke the camel's back here, and John Bolton is out in part because of that.
All right, I want to bring in ABC's John Carl, who's on the phone with us. John, I just want to ask you, you've been covering President Trump for this entire administration. What does it mean to have the third national security advisor leave the White House?
Well, it is utterly without precedent to have this much turnover at such a critical position. 3 national security advisors in not a little over 2.5 years. It's really an incredible symbol of the kind of the rapid change and lack of stability you've seen at the White House senior staff. Such an important job. But I got to tell you, Bolton has been at odds with the president for a long time. This was a rough position from the beginning. Bolton had been cut out of the loop on many significant major initiatives of the president's. Perhaps most significantly, the overture to North Korea. Bolton, if you remember when the president made his dramatic step at the DMZ over onto the North Korean side of the border, where was John Bolton? This is a major meeting of the president and the leader of North Korea. John Bolton was actually in Mongolia at the time. He didn't even go along with the president. So he was at odds with him on that. Obviously, as you've just talked to Terry, he was at odds with the whole approach to Afghanistan, not just the negotiating with the Taliban, but also troop levels. He was somebody who found himself frequently on the outside in some of the major initiatives that this president has done in terms of national security and foreign policy.
And John, before we let you go, what does it mean when you can't disagree with the president?
Well, I mean, there is. I think that this is a president who actually, perhaps to his credit, does have people around him who disagree with him. Some of his major policy initiatives. Bolton was exhibit one on this. But the president also needs to have somebody around who believes in what he is doing. And when you have a national security advisor who truly, in his deepest convictions, does not believe in the president's most important foreign policy initiatives, that's a problem.
All right, John Karl right there on the phone with us. And Terry, who do we think... Oh, Terry is gone as well. So, guys, you've been watching ABC News Live. If you're joining us right now, right before we go, the breaking news was that President Trump has fired the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. He has officially resigned. So, ABC News Live, thank you for joining us.